some things some things that we talked about last time, and then we'll move on to some new material. We're actually beginning tonight in Judges chapter 9. We'll start at verse 42. But before we get to that, I want to think a little bit about Gideon and some of the things that we read last time. So, do you remember how many men from among his servants that Gideon used to tear down the altar of Baal and that wooden image that was beside it? Remember how many of his servants he used?
10.
10. Yes, 10. And why did he do it at night?
Oh, he was afraid of the people.
Yes, he was afraid. And that, don't you? I do. I find it ironic that the angel of the Lord refers to him as this mighty man of valor, but he is so afraid. But what God sees in us, sometimes we don't see in ourselves. And so, yeah, this was actually, remember, this was actually that very same night in which he was called this mighty man. And so it's, I guess maybe I'm thinking too much for Gideon that he should have changed overnight to be that. But yes, he had 10 men who helped him with this, and he did it at night because the text actually says he was afraid. So, how many times did Gideon test God with the fleece?
5.
Twice, two different times. Exactly right. So he set it up one way, and he could, in the morning he wrung the fleece out because it was so full of water, filled up a bucket. And then he was like, maybe, maybe God didn't do that. I don't know for sure. Lord, please be patient with me. Let's do it the opposite way next time. So again, mighty, and if you're like me, you're kind of on the sidelines like a cheerleader, hoping that things are going to work out for him. And eventually he gets better and better at this and trusting God. But boy, he does test God a lot. So how many men initially in the beginning joined Gideon's army to fight the Midianites?
I think there were 300. 10,000.
Well, yeah, to begin with. So you remember he had this mass of people show up, and the first thing that the Lord had him do was thin them out by asking how many of them were afraid. And you remember I've thought with you, well, if the fearful were going, we'd have lost Gideon right off the bat because he was afraid. But actually 22,000 left who were afraid, which left 10,000. So all you do is add the 22 to the 10, you get an initial group. The first group was 32,000, everybody together. But by the time the fighting was to start, how many did he have?
300.
300. 300 actually fought the battle. Do you remember the name that Joash, and that's Gideon's father, but do you remember the name that Joash gave to Gideon?
Jerubbaal.
Jerubbaal. Yeah, and I like, I really think a lot of Joash, not his idolatry, of course, but the way that he thought, if Gideon could tear down the the idol and all the things associated with it and the altar, and that God didn't act on its own behalf, he could see very quickly that there was nothing to it. So, he said, let Baal plead for himself. Let him take up his own case. And so he renames his son Jerubbaal. We also started our look at Abimelech, and in fact, we're kind of in the middle of that. We've seen Abimelech, who was actually, the son of a concubine, not even, not a legitimate son of Gideon, but kind of to the side. He kills, sets up to kill the 70 sons. One of them is able to escape, but puts out this big curse. And then Abimelech goes about his work, and he decides, he goes with Shechem, and they're associated with his family, his mother's family. And with Shechem behind him, Abimelech puts himself up as a king. I mentioned in the beginning that I personally, and nor does the scripture actually identify him this way, but I said that I didn't normally consider Abimelech to be a judge, basically because the scripture doesn't tell us that he is. And also, the way this story ends, which we will see here tonight, it just suggests to me that this is a story that's put here to show us the degradation of that time, about how far people were going away from God and the lengths that they would go to do their own thing. But you know what? That is, I think, an opinion. And I was wondering, do you consider Abimelech to be a judge? And if you do, why do you think that? And if you don't, why don't you think that?
I must say I don't, because all the others were sent by God to lead the people out of a pressurized situation, and
Yes.
he wasn't. He didn't have nothing to do with God actually.
Yeah. And he created his own trouble, didn't he? So that's a very good observation. Usually, in fact, in every other case, the situation is that the people are oppressed by an outside force, an outside nation, and then in response to that, the people cry out, and God sends a deliverer. That is not the pattern here. Abimelech is the one who becomes uh, creates the problems. Does anybody have a different feeling about that? I don't think you're right or wrong in your opinion about this. I've seen him in lists of judges, and I've seen him out of those lists. I just think, in my opinion, while it is instructive in terms of how the nation was going, that the Bible just isn't definite on just exactly where to put him. Doesn't, even though he considers himself a king, or at least regionally so, he isn't biblically, other than the way he described himself, he isn't really considered among the kings of God's people. We done beating on that. I just thought that'd be an interesting question to pose. Okay, we're going to start here tonight in chapter 9 at verse 42, and we're really in the middle of the story, because remember, Shechem was all about getting rid of Abimelech by now, and Gaal rose up, and he's like, who is Abimelech? He's a nobody, and I'm your man. And Gaal thought that he had this thing all wrapped up, and now he was going to dispose of Abimelech. But Abimelech was aided by really his own people. I love how Zebul, who basically was I don't know if you'd call him the city mayor or if he was the governor of this area, but Abimelech had put Zebul in this position of authority, and Gaal thought that Zebul was on his side. And so, as Abimelech was approaching and setting up basically an ambush, Zebul was buying him time, and Gaal was surprised, and ultimately he is overcome. But Abimelech is not satisfied with just taking care of Gaal. Abimelech now is wanting to take vengeance on those people who are trying to unseat him as the king. And now he is about to go on a rampage. it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field and they told Abimelech. So he took his people, divided them into three companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city, and he rose against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city. And the other two companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He took the city, killed the people who were in it, and demolished the city and sowed it with salt. Now, when all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god Berith. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Then Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand, cut down a bow from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to the people who were with him, "What you've seen me do, make haste and do as I have done." So each of the people likewise cut down his own bow and followed Abimelech, put them against the stronghold, and set the stronghold on fire above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. So Abimelech has this score to settle. He is upset with the citizens of Shechem who had cursed him back in verse 27. Those folks who had been in those attacking caravans and had been robbing and just taking action against Abimelech, trying to unseat him as the king. So when the people of Shechem went out of the city to work in those fields, Abimelech, he set an ambush. He blocked the city gate. He slaughtered the trapped citizens. And what you have is the unfolding of the vengeance of the Lord against really what had happened to Gideon's sons. When that blood had been shed and the one remaining son made his plea and then ran off and hid, God has begun to work in satisfying basically the prophecy that had been put out there. So the Lord's avenging the blood of Gideon's sons. And just like, like it says in verse 15 of this text, that they were going to come out, that fire was going to come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Basically, those cedars of Lebanon represented the leading citizens of the city of Shechem who had supported Abimelech's rule. So now that they had turned on him, Abimelech himself becomes the one who disposes of them in terms of this prophecy. So in order to make sure that the city didn't rebel against him again, Abimelech, he tore the city down, burned it up, and then sowed salt all over it. And salt was two things. Number one, just the sowing of salt pretty well, at least for a generation or so, made sure that nobody was going to be able to grow anything on that ground. But more importantly, it was a symbolic act of condemning a city to desolation. Nobody's ever going to want to live there again. So these leading individuals of Shechem have now been disposed of, and you would think that's gonna do it. Everything's fine, but not so. Abimelech is bloodthirsty now. He's not satisfied, and he is going to right the wrongs of every turn that has been against him thus far. I thought it was interesting that once Abimelech started taking action, that the people actually fled to the temple area in El Bereth, probably thinking that if they were in a temple, that maybe Abimelech would respect that, and he wouldn't attack it. But boy, that is not the case. He burned the thing down and killed all the people in it. Before we go any further, Any comment about how spiteful Abimelech was?
He was a bloodthirsty leader from the
Oh,
start.
bloodthirst. Yes.
From the start, you remember he slaughtered the sons of Gideon,
Yes.
and up to until now, where that's far we have read, we still find him still killing.
I know, and uh, there are, how do I put it? It's like Abimelech, Abimelech just his 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 desire, his desire to be in this position of authority as the king, whatever. Maybe it's because, he wasn't recognized as a legitimate kind of son of Gideon. Maybe just he felt like he'd been slighted all his life. And I don't know what motivates a person into this situation, but it's like he is losing himself now. The people who had put him on the throne, boy, when they turned on him, he didn't even think about it. It's just like he immediately lashes out at them in an attempt to hang on to this power. Just wow, just a stark contrast, I think, to the kind of character that his own father, Gideon, was. All right, beginning at verse 50. Then Abimelech went to Thebez. Now, apparently, Thebez was not very far from Shechem, and so they were in league with Shechem, had joined Shechem in turning against Abimelech. So Abimelech, he goes to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city, fled there and shut themselves in. Then they went up to the top of the tower. Now, stop right there. It's exactly the same thing that had happened over there in Shechem. They get in this tower. They think, oh, wow, we're protected. But Abimelech's already shown he has a strategy against this kind of defense. And so Abimelech came as far as the tower and he fought against it. And he drew near the door of the tower to burn it with fire. He was going to do the same thing to them as he just did to Shechem. And he drew near to the door to put it to fire, but a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Does this remind you of any similar thing that had happened?
Yes. It reminds us.
Yeah, you remember? Oh, poor old Sisera, right? Sisera shows up at Jael's tent and she gives him the warm milk and then drives a tent peg through his head. He's killed by a woman. So Abimelech gets too close to the wall and a woman drops a millstone on his head. So he called quickly, didn't kill him apparently. He called quickly to his young man, his armor bearer, and he said, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed him." So his young man thrust him through and he died. Now, I want to stop right there. Question, how did Abimelech die? A woman killed him. I mean, don't we know that? All of us know that. We know that. Abimelech was thinking, if I just have my young man kill me, nobody will ever know that a woman killed me. And yet, here we have all, for these many, many hundreds of years since, been talking about how Abimelech was killed by a woman. His pride was so huge, but it made no difference. In fact, now it makes him look even worse. You know, can't you just accept what's happened to you? You are so vain. Abimelech is so vain that he cannot imagine dying as a result of a woman killing him. Now, number one, Abimelech wasn't actually fighting when this happened. Yeah, it was a siege and he was planning to burn the place, but you know, he wasn't in an open battle with anybody. She just threw a millstone and hit him in the head. So he wasn't fighting at the time. He wasn't killed by a sword. He was killed by a woman. And then cowardly enough, instead of just accepting what has happened, he's so vain that he has his own bearer kill him. There is just absolutely no glory at all in any of this. When the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed, every man to his place. Thus, God, now listen to this. And, you know, I'm sure Abimelech and all of them, the actions that they took, they thought that of course, they were their own actions, but all the time, all the while, God is working through these events. Verse 56 says, thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers, and all the evil of the men of Shechem, God returned on their own heads. And on them came the curse of Jotham, that one son that remained. The curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. Wow.
Can I
Yes.
just say, I'm thinking about, is it Romans 12, where God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, how does God feel? And that is such a great reference. You know, in Romans 12, the idea is you don't take vengeance for yourself. You know, you let God take vengeance. God is a just God, and God is always going to do the right thing. When it comes to the shedding of innocent blood, that is something that God takes very seriously. And no matter how long it takes, he is going to eventually avenge the shedding of that innocent blood. Did Abimelech finally pay for all of these murders that he had committed?
Yes.
Oh, yes, it did. Was he the rightful king to the throne?
No.
No, he was not. And it didn't matter how many towers he burned down, how many people he oppressed, he was never going to be a legitimate king. And no matter what decisions that he made, God was in pursuit of making this thing right. And no matter even that an entire city or group of people under the guise of the city of Shechem, even that contingent of men are held accountable for their part in all that had happened. I mentioned, you know, that there actually is the triple disgrace of Abimelech. He's killed, but not really in battle. He's killed by a woman, which was a disgrace to a soldier. He's killed with a millstone and not a sword. And the fact that his armor bearer finishes him off with a sword didn't change anything. Did you know that not only are we the ones that recognize this, but there's actually a reference in 2 Samuel chapter 11. And by the way, this is when, you know, David is trying to get Uriah the Hittite put into the front of the battle, and he's dies in the heat of battle. And when David gets word back from Joab that Uriah, you know, they had been in the heat of the battle and they had pulled back, they had gone up too close, and then they had pulled back. And ultimately, the purpose of that on Joab's part was to fulfill basically the death sentence of Uriah, as had David instructed. But in that, my point in bringing that up is that in that, um, Joab is telling David that this has happened, and David says, "Well, why did you approach so near to the city when you fought? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck Abimelech, the son of Jerubesheth? Was it not a woman who cast a piece of a millstone on him from the wall so that he died?" I just thought that's interesting. Abimelech wanted that incident to be forgotten by history, but it wasn't really that much later that once David actually became a legitimate king, he remembers that event. That is a story that people have been telling over and over and over again. Abimelech loses his life, he loses his kingdom, he loses any sense of glory that he might have thought that he was going to gain for himself as he tried to dispose all of these people and get them out of the way. I also think it's interesting that this curse that was pronounced by his half brother Jotham was actually fulfilled there little by little. I just think that's interesting. Another quote that you could add to the Romans 12 reference is Psalm 34 and verse 21. That text says that evil will slay the wicked, the foes of the righteous will be condemned. Proverbs 21 verse 12 says that the righteous one takes note of the house of the wicked and brings the wicked to ruin. How do you feel about the way that Abimelech died? Do you feel like justice was served, or what exactly?
If justice was served, not by
Me too. uh, let me say this. This is free. You don't even have to pay for this little bit of advice. Please understand, and I know here we're here studying the Bible. Our desire right here in this moment in time, wherever it is that you are in your life, my desire, your desire, I think, is just to serve God, know God better, be faithful to God. But I'm going to tell you, if you ever, and God forbid that it does ever happen, but if you ever decide you're going to be unfaithful to God, you're going to turn your back on him, you're going to sin against him, and you don't care, I promise you, it is not going to turn out well. So my imploring to you is, Revelation 2, verse 10, be faithful until death, and he'll give you the crown of life. Be faithful. You don't have to worry about the kinds of things that befell Abimelech. Chapter 10. We'll look at these first opening verses because this is going to be a lot of history that passes quickly. In 2 verses, we're going to go 45 years. Wow! So hang on tight, okay? So after Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, the son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he dwelt in Shamir in the mountains of Ephraim. He judged Israel 23 years, and he died and was buried in Shamir. After him arose Jair, a Gileadite, and he judged Israel 22 years. Now, he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys They also had 30 towns, which are called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Hammon. Okay, two judges identified as such in these verses. Two verses describing what was going on with Tola, and three very short verses describing what goes on with Jair. And what do you get from that? What do these very short descriptions of this 45-year period tell you about the work of Tola and Jair?
They were faithful.
Okay, number one, they're faithful. They're faithful. Who did they fight against, or who did they deliver Israel from, or who did they protect Israel from?
No one. They were in harmony. They lived in harmony.
Okay, yeah, that I don't, there isn't any threat identified. It's like, maybe they were so faithful or were such great leaders that they built up Israel to the degree that there were no threats. In fact, not necessarily with Tola, because there isn't any indication of it so much. But look at Jair for a minute. So he judges Israel after Tola has judged them for 23 years and there's peace and no problems. So as things are going well, now Jair comes in immediately and he has 30 sons. Now, what does that tell you about him to start with? How does anybody have 30 sons?
He's very.
Well,
Yeah.
either
He has at least 15 wives.
either he had a very sad wife or he probably had several wives. Okay, probably had several wives. He has 30 sons who ride on 30 donkeys. Okay, now I'll tell you what, I had three. My children are grown now, but have three. I have two boys and a daughter. And at one time, the three of my children shared one automobile together. If I had had 30 sons, probably would have had 30 sons sharing one automobile. But each one of these people, kind of in relation comparatively, every one of them, if they had been living in our, we'd say they all had a car. They all had donkeys were a commodity, an expensive thing. In fact, usually, I don't know how it is in South Africa, but here, most people wouldn't think that much of a donkey. They'd be like, thinking about maybe number one animal would be a horse or something like that. But in this time, the donkey was a prized possession. I mean, you could do a lot of things with a donkey. It was a animal of burden. It could carry your things. It could pull carts. You could ride it. Just a lot of things that you could do with a donkey. So typically, when you're in a position of some wealth or authority, you're kingly, you rode on a donkey. I mean, it just showed how wealthy and powerful you are. So if you have 30 sons who ride on donkeys, what is that saying about you? You are wealthy, you are powerful. Okay, so it didn't even stop there, right? Every single one of these sons had a town. They had their own town. So 30 sons, 30 donkeys, 30 towns. No wonder there was peace. Think about that. If you're like Jair, if you're or Jair, however you pronounce that, if you're the person who's at the top, and then underneath you, as the judge, underneath you are all your sons who have their own towns, well, aren't you more easily able to control what's happening in those towns? I mean, wow, things seemed to be going so well. But if we stop and survey history, this immediate history, how long do things usually keep going well during the period of the judges? Oh, about 40, 45 years or so. At one point, we had 80 years of peace. Okay, 80 years of peace. But after that, what happened? Despite enjoying peace and security, thanks to the leadership of these two judges, despite the fact we don't know much about them, nearly half a century shows how faithful they were, and they're serving the Lord, and all that is so positive. But after the death of Jair, the nation openly returns to its idolatry. And once again, it is going to invite the chastening, the disciplining of the Lord. They had enjoyed 45 years of peace and prosperity, but they hadn't taken the time to thank the Lord for what he had done for them. The essence, and I've thought about this for a long time, and it seems to me this is the thing, that the essence of idolatry, of serving a false God, is that in this period of peace, you are enjoying the true God and his gifts. You are enjoying his gifts, but you're not being grateful to him. You're turning your back on the giver of those gifts and serving a useless idol. And Israel was absolutely guilty of that. Now, when you study just these handful of verses, just 5 verses, the stories of these minor judges, and we could even go back to something like Shamgar, only 1 verse of scripture given. When you read about these judges with so little information, what does it add to your understanding of the events that take place in the book? I mean, how does the study of these guys actually enhance what it is that you're learning generally in the book of Judges?
I think it's very much like John says, these things are written for your learning. So it's like they are same old, same old, You can repeat the story only so many times before it gets boring.
Yeah.
So I think it was just to prevent us from getting bored that God, okay, summarized them.
Yeah, that's maybe so. It's like, yeah, I don't know any details about those guys, so I can't say anything bad about them. But all the other ones that I've looked at so far, there was a hint, especially in the moment in which God really delivers using them, there is that peak of faithfulness. And then it's just like, as they're holding it together for just a moment, if we could just end this story right here, everything would be great, but we don't. And then we go from this mountaintop down to this deep valley of disgust, it seems like. And it is a breath of fresh air to have a couple of guys or 3 or 4 who, even though we don't have much information about them, we finally just can stop and take a breath and say, boy, I sure am glad that they made it through without messing the thing up. So now we're about, yeah, we started up here when we first started. Remember, the first people to go into battle was Judah, and boy, they did great. And then from there, it has gone down, 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 down. It's just even the character, and I'm not talking about a character as a person in the story. I'm talking about the person's character. Each one of these judges, it seems like the farther we go along, the character of that person becomes more and more flawed. As we go farther in history, it's like the farther away people are from God. When we started, we're with Judah, very close to God, right on the heels of the time with Joshua and the elders. Okay, now we're far removed from that, and we've had these ups and downs, and the character of people is all going down, down, down. Yeah, God is finding men in order to deliver his people, but the heart of those people starts at a lower place with each generation, it seems. So the ceiling to which they can rise is much lower and much lower. That is going to become so evident in this next story, the story that involves a man by the name of Jephthah. So we're in Judges chapter 10. We're going to begin at verse 6. Now the foe, our enemy, are the Ammonites. The children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the people of Ammon, the gods of the Philistines, and they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the people of Ammon. From that year, they harassed and oppressed the children of Israel for 18 years. All the children of Israel who were on the other side of the Jordan in the land of the Amorites in Gilead. Moreover, the people of Ammon crossed over the Jordan to fight against Judah also, against Benjamin, and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was severely distressed. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, we have sinned against you, because we have both forsaken our God and served the Baals. So the Lord said to the children of Israel, did I not deliver you from the Egyptians, from the Amorites, from the people of Ammon, from the Philistines? Did I already do that? Also the Sidonians, the Amalekites, the Moabites oppressed you. You cried out to me. I delivered you from their hand. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore, I will deliver you no more. Go and cry out to the gods which you've chosen. Let them deliver you in your time of distress. The children of Israel said to the Lord, we've sinned. Do to us whatever seems best to you. Only deliver us this day, we pray. So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord. And his soul could no longer endure the misery of Israel. Then the people of Ammon gathered together, encamped in Gilead, and the children of Israel assembled together and encamped in Mizpah. The people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, who is the man who will begin the fight against the people of Ammon? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So you remember how that just turned out with Abimelech. When the story ended, we found out that God had been working through all of that history, slowly bringing about his own action against that bloodthirsty false king. Well, God in this scenario had allowed the Philistines and the Ammonites to oppress the Israelites for 18 years. When they cry out to the Lord, he reminds them of their failure to remain devoted to him. And in response to that, I'm really surprised, because this is one of the few times that anything like this happens, perhaps the only time where people independently do this, but they throw away all their foreign gods and they determine they're only going to serve the Lord. And so because of that, they turned the heart of the Lord. The Lord he loves his people, and he is moved to deliver them again. So why is it, you think, that these Israelites have such a bad memory? I mean, does this seem to be almost like a broken record? You know, when a record's broken, it just keeps playing the same sound over and over and over again. And it seems like we're getting the same sound over and over and over again. God is constantly reminding his people of all the things that he had done in the past. Why does he have to keep reminding them? Why does Israel have such a poor memory?
When they were saving the false god, they keep on saving the what's false god, yeah, false god. Even when God like forgive them, they keep doing the same thing just like that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sir, we just had technological problems here. Can you just tell me, please, where you are right now?
We're at the very end of chapter 10. We just read through verses 6 through 18. And
Thank you.
yes, you're welcome. I here's the thing. You and I, we are reading a text that, for instance, in 5 verses, we covered 45 years, right? Tola and Jer, we just boom, 45 years done. And I'm getting the idea, and now, well, back up. So short period of time cover, or short grouping of verses covers a long period of time. When you talk about chapters that we've been reading over, you're talking 100 years, just happens very quickly. And there's a period in which people are faithful, and then they become unfaithful, and then they are oppressed. There was 18 years, an 18-year period in which they're oppressed by the Ammonites. Okay. Is it possible? In fact, I think this is more likely the problem, that we've got a scenario very much like what happened following like Joshua's period of leadership. There arose a generation who did not know the things that God had done for Israel. They did not know the works that he had done. The reason that they did not know those things is because their parents didn't tell them. And because their parents didn't tell them or remind them of all the good things that God had done, a generation rises up not knowing about how great and awesome their God is. And so every time they fall away or they apostatize, then the first thing God does is come in and tell this new generation of people, hold on, I'm the very same God. Maybe you've heard of me, maybe you haven't, but I delivered this very same people from Egyptian bondage. I'm the one that defeated your oppressors so many years ago. I'm the same God who can do that now. So oftentimes we need to be reminded, not because we have a poor memory necessarily, but because maybe we didn't know to start with. Maybe we were in total ignorance. Maybe as parents, we should feel the weight of responsibility to teach our children about God so that going forward, they will have their own faith and that they will be able to trust God as our parents taught us probably and instilled that faith in us, helped us to choose a good path. Okay. Let's see. It's almost the top of the hour, so this is a good place to stop. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, okay, short little break, and then we'll come back and pick up here beginning in chapter 11, okay? We'll take about a 10-minute break. Be back about, let's say, 8 after the hour. See you in just a little bit. This isn't just God making a commentary on him, hoping that he'll become something. The text begins this way. That's what he is. Jephthah, mighty man of valor, but he was the son of a harlot. And Gilead begot Jephthah. Gilead's wife bore sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall have no inheritance in our father's house, for you're the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tob. And worthless men banded together with Jephthah and went out raiding with him. Okay, so get the picture. He's a mighty man of valor, but he's son of harlot, and he's riding with worthless men. It came to pass after a time that the people of Ammon made war against Israel. And so it was when the people of Ammon made war against Israel that the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our commander, that we may fight against the people of Ammon." So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and expel me from my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "Well, that's why we've turned again to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the people of Ammon and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you take me back home to fight against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivers them to me, shall I be your head?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will be a witness between us if we do not do according to your words." Then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord in Mizpah. So Jephthah, the son of a prostitute, driven from home by his half-brothers who refused to share the family inheritance, he becomes a leader of a gang of outlaws. But then the elders of Gilead ask him to fight the Ammonites for them. He's got a reputation now, and they even bargained such that they would agree not only that he be the military leader, but that he become their tribal chief. Why do you think the elders are willing to give up so much for Jephthah to lead them?
Because he have gathered men, so so it's like a leader now. He the ability to lead. That's why.
Yeah, they're desperate, aren't they? They are desperate. "We need you, please come back."
They're desperate
I
to
think
lead.
it's
Yes.
um it is a little bit reminiscent of what we've seen before in that, I mean, he is a mighty man of valor. He is a skilled warrior and all of that, but it's like, they're all proud and puffed up. until they really need something desperately bad, and now they're willing to give up anything to have it. So beginning at
There's,
verse 12, yes,
sorry,
someone.
there's a saying that says, hunger makes the best cook.
Yeah, okay. You're gonna have to crack some eggs, aren't you? One thing though, and did you notice this as we went through it? Almost all of this gives reference to the Lord's will. You know, if the Lord delivers them to me, shall I be your head? Yes, the Lord is a witness between us. He spoke all these words before the Lord in Mizpah. It's like at this juncture, especially Jephthah has, despite his upbringing, despite the people he runs with, he still has this awesome respect and understanding of who God is and his willingness to do whatever the Lord is with. If, you know, let the Lord be the witness to these things, the Lord be the one. I just really like the emphasis that comes out in that. So beginning verse 12, now Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the people of Ammon, the one he's supposed to fight against. And here's what he said. What do you have against me that you've come to fight against me in my land? And the king of the people of Ammon answered the messengers of Jephthah. And here's what he said. Because Israel took away my land when they came up out of Egypt, from the Arnon as far as Jabbok and to the Jordan. Now, therefore, restore those lands peaceably. So they're claiming, you know, so many years ago, you guys took our land and we want it back. So Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the people of Ammon, and he said to them, thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the people of Ammon. For when Israel came up from Egypt, they walked through the wilderness as far as the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let me pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not heed. And in like manner they sent to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained in Kadesh. And they went along through the wilderness and bypassed the land of Edom and the land of Moab, came to the east side of the land of Moab, and encamped on the other side of the Arnon. But they didn't enter the border of Moab, for the Arnon was the border of Moab. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon. And Israel said to him, please let us pass through your land into our place. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together, encamped in Jahaz, and fought against Israel. And the Lord God of Israel delivered Sihon and all his people in the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. Thus Israel gained possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country. They took possession of all the territory of the Amorites, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. And now the Lord God of Israel has dispossessed the Amorites from before the people of Israel. Should you then possess it? I mean, what right do you have to it, is his question. Will you not possess whatever Chemosh your God gives you to possess? So whatever the Lord our God takes possession of before us, we will possess. And now, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever strive against Israel? Did he ever fight against them? Well, Israel dwelt in Heshbon and its villages, in Arar and its villages, and in all the cities along the banks of the Arnon for 300 years. Why did you not recover them within that time? Therefore, I've not sinned against you, but you wronged me by fighting against me. May the Lord, the judge, render judgment this day between the children of Israel and the people of Ammon. However, the king of the people of Ammon did not heed the words which Jephthah sent him. What is it that Jephthah had that the Amorites did not have? It's my question to you.
Was it not the issue of land, which the Amorites they claimed they were dispossessed by the Israelites when they left Egypt?
Yes. Okay, the Amorites are claiming possession of something they really did not own. Jephthah comes in there with and what I meant by what Jephthah had that the Amorites didn't have. Jephthah had history. You know, I can only imagine those Amorites are demanding this land. And Jephthah comes in there and he says, let me just give you a history lesson. Here's what happened. Here's what really happened. We went through there and we were all peaceable, like we just wanted to get to our territory. So as we're going through, we were asking these various nations, hey, would it be okay if we just pass through you? And practically every single one of them said no. And so, we ended up fighting these folks. And then the Lord gave us their territory. We dispossessed them of their land because they wanted to fight. We never even started the fight, but here they came. And so we fought them and we won. We weren't looking for a fight, but we got a fight. And when we won that fight, God gave us this land. So what is it that you have to say that your God did? Did your God ever defeat any kings to give you this land? No, he did not. So the king of Ammon is declaring that they own this land, but they had no right to it. And so after this history lesson and all of these compelling arguments, the Amorites rejected it and said, we want it anyway. Like they're just going to take it for themselves. Now, I want to ask you at this point, is Jephthah only good for fighting? Or do we see something else as a skill that Jephthah possesses?
Negotiation.
Absolutely. Here's what you hear a lot today. You hear a lot about diplomacy. Diplomacy is when two nations or groups of nations, either side, they are set to fight. But before the fight actually begins, what we want to do is sit down and talk this thing through. Jephthah knows that God is on his side. Number one, we are going to win this battle because God is on our side. If God is witness to this, which we've already been through, God is witness to this, he is going to, I have victory. I know that. I already have that in my back pocket. But you know what? I want to be a good neighbor. And so I am willing to sit down with you and try to help you understand why it is that things are the way they are. And here's my history lesson. I'm just going to lay it out there for you. I know exactly. I just love that Jephthah is not just a skilled warrior. He can do it with might. But instead of doing that, he wants to begin by being the diplomat. He has a level head. He isn't like Abimelech that we just read. Boy, Abimelech, he's a hothead. He just wants to burn down towers. Not Jephthah. Jephthah wants to take this step by step and try to do the right thing. I just love that. Not just the force. He has force, but he doesn't have to use it. He has a level head about him. But here's what's going to be ironic about that. He is so trusting in the Lord that he opens himself up to an action for which he will always be remembered. And that is held within the verses from verse 29 to 40. One of the most astounding stories in the scriptures, the story about Jephthah's vow. It said that the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead. From Mizpah of Gilead, he'd advanced toward the people of Ammon, and Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. And he said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the people of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Now, I can imagine right here what, he's thinking. He's like, you know what, Lord, everything I have is yours, and I'm trusting you for deliverance, and, you're going to, and I'll tell you what, I'll even make a deal with you. When you give us this great victory, then when I return in peace, oh, it's going to be so exciting. Whatever comes out, he's probably thinking about, maybe a big old bull will come marching out of there. I'm willing to give it to you, Lord, or whatever it is. Just, I'm willing. But he doesn't make any stipulations about this. He doesn't say within a certain framework. It's just whatever happens. And so Jephthah advanced toward the people of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. Of course he did. And he defeated them from Aurora as far as Minnith, 20 cities, until Abel Keramim, with a very great slaughter. Thus the people of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. When Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing. And she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. It came to pass when he saw her that he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you've brought me very low. You're among those who trouble me, for I've given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. So she said to him, my father, if you've given your word to the Lord, do to me according to what's gone out of your mouth, because the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the people of Ammon. Then she said to her father, let this thing be done for me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my friends and I. So he said, go. And he sent her away for 2 months. She went with her friends and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. And it was so at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow with her, which he had vowed. She knew no man. She had never been with a man. It became a custom, and this is basically a commentary on that. It became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went 4 days each year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. So in review, Jephthah, he gathered the army, advanced against the Ammonites, and he vowed to sacrifice to the Lord the first thing that comes out of his house when he returns from the battle, if the Lord would give the victory. And the Lord did give the victory. And the first thing that comes out of his house is not a bull. It's not a lamb. It's not a goat. It's not a pigeon. It's his daughter. And Jephthah kept his vow. How does this part of the story make you feel about Jephthah?
I think Jephthah was a man of integrity by virtue that he made a promise and he fulfilled and honored that promise. To me, I see him as a man of his word. He honored his word before the Lord.
Okay. Is it shocking to you, despite him being a man of integrity, that he would offer his daughter, his only child, in this way?
I don't think
Absolutely.
it's so it's coming. I don't think it's so it's coming.
Um, to me that, you know, you make a promise to God, going to keep your promise. All of us would agree to that. It's just the shocking nature of the promise that he keeps, I guess. Am I the only one in the room that kind of feels that way? It's like,
She had,
you know, go
she had
ahead.
2 months. She had 2 months to bewail her virginity, but he had 2 months and a lifetime after to bewail his loose tongue.
Yes. What do you think? What do you think about his daughter? You know, she has absolutely, I mean, I'm kind of speechless. His daughter becomes the victim of his integrity, you know? And while he does relent in the sense that he gives her 2 months with her friends or whatever, still, when 2 months are up, um, you know, she is paying the ultimate price for his rash vow.
I think also God wanted to know how strong is he, how strong is he, because God took his only daughter, so he wanted to see how strong he is. So, how strong is he with God, or like how strong is the faith to see.
You know, an interesting part of all of this is that, yes, the Lord gives the deliverance, but would the Lord given deliverance even if he had not made this vow?
Yes.
Did the Lord say, now, Jephthah, if you'll make a vow to me, I'll give you the victory?
No.
No,
No, no. In fact, even after Jephthah makes the vow, what do we hear from God after that? God doesn't come in and say, okay, I gave you the victory. Remember now, you made a promise, so you give me that. Does God come in here and say, Jephthah, you did the right thing, and boy, if you hadn't have offered your daughter for me, I wouldn't have get. God is not even really a party to all that's happening here. It's not like God said, you do this, Jephthah. What I'm getting at is Jephthah is a product of his own time, his own generations, and the influence of the people that are around him. It was nothing for Jephthah within the worship of an idol setting. It would not have been anything for him to offer whatever he had to an idol without a thought. It's like he's taking the actions and responses that most idolaters had to their false gods, and he's applying it to the true God of heaven. I don't have to make a deal with God in order for God to be faithful to his purposes and his plans. It's not like I say, okay, now, Lord, I know that you want the gospel to be preached in my community. So here's what I'm going to do. Lord, if you will empower me to go and preach the gospel, then you know what? When I go home, I'm going to take my car and I'm going to sign off the title and give it to the church. If you will, I don't have to make deals with God when God has already set in motion the success for the thing that is his will. God was going to do something about these Ammonites, whether Jephthah was involved or not. And for Jephthah to take his own initiative without the requirement of God and to offer something in such a flippant sort of way that not only would, and what you said is absolutely right. The daughter in this story has 2 months to deal with what's about to happen. Jephthah was going to have to face that for the rest of his life.
Brother Ken,
Yes, go ahead.
it reminds me of the story of Abraham and Isaac, but in this instance, the Lord did not stop Jephthah, but he did do it for Abraham. So, yeah, it's just the twist of the situation. In Jephthah's situation, he made the promise, whereas God knew what was going to happen with Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing to mind that comparison is very important. In the case of Abraham, God required that of Abraham. Abraham acted and then God stayed, he stopped the action. In this case, God made no such requirement of Jephthah, and he did not intervene and let Jephthah act on his promise.
Very sad.
That's just wow.
Yeah.
Just,
Brother Ken,
yes.
if you go to Ecclesiastes 5 verse 2 to 6, it says, "Be careful when you make promises to God. Be careful about what you say to Him. Don't let your feelings cause you to speak too soon. God is in heaven and you are on the earth."
God's going to hear it, isn't he? Be
That's
careful
right.
the promises you make. Woo. All right. Well, I'll just kind of pull ourselves together. All right, chapter 12, verse 1. The men of Ephraim gathered together, crossed over towards Zaphon, said to Jephthah, "Why'd you cross over to fight against the people of Ammon? Didn't call us to go with you. We'll burn your house down on you with fire." Wait, stop. Hasn't this happened before? Remember when Gideon went with just 300 men to fight? These folks, the Ephraimites, came back and said, "Why didn't you call us?" These people drive me crazy. So we're going to burn your house down. Jephthah said, "My people and I were in a great struggle with the people of Ammon. And when I called you, you did not deliver me out of their hands. So when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hands and crossed over against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me?" Now Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim, his own people. The men of Gilead defeated Ephraim because they said, "You Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim among the Ephraimites, among the Manassites." The Gileadites seized the fords of the Jordan before the Ephraimites arrived. And when any Ephraimite who escaped said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead would say to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he said, "Well, no," then they'd say to him, "You say Shibboleth." And he would say, "Sibboleth," for he could not pronounce it right. Then they would take him and kill him at the fords of the Jordan. There fell at that time 42,000 Ephraimites. So apparently the Ephraimites either had an accent or a speech impediment that did not allow them to say shibboleth. They would say sibboleth instead. And when they couldn't say it right, they knew that they were Ephraimites and they killed them. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried among the cities of Gilead. We're going to burn your house down, Jephthah, because you didn't invite us to go into the fight. Wow. Wow. And now not only are we fighting against the Canaanites, we're fighting against our own people. We're fighting amongst ourselves. This is different, yes? You see how things are starting to fall apart. Have you ever had people upset with you because you didn't involve them in something?
There's a saying
No.
about sour grapes.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, you know what? You sure know a lot of sayings. You always
I
have
was
a really,
I was a Gerber.
you always have a lot of really good, interesting sayings that go along with these stories. I think that's terrific. Yeah, you sour grapes for sure. How did Jephthah differ from like Gideon in his approach with the Ephraimites? Remember, when the Ephraimites came to Gideon and asked him why they didn't involve him, what did he say? You remember? He said, "Oh, I didn't want to bother you with this. You guys are so good at so many things, and you're just so amazing. Oh, you're amazing." Jephthah, he took him head on, right? He's like, you didn't come when I asked you, so you're not participating. A little bit for all of Jephthah's diplomacy with the Ammonites, he was not very diplomatic with his own people, the Ephraimites. There is, and maybe there's a saying about this too. Give you a few minutes to think of it, but there's one way that you deal with outsiders, and then there is also another way sometimes we deal with our own people, our own families. And while he was trying to extend a lot of grace um, to one, he wasn't offering it to the other. I just think that's pretty interesting too,
You
as a
wanna
side
you wanna hear my you wanna hear my
note. Yes, please.
This actually reminds me of this one. A prophet is never as popular in his own town.
That's exactly right. That was absolutely true of Jesus. When he comes to preach the gospel to his own people, they reject it. He goes elsewhere, he has multitudes following after him. Brava, brava. Okay, we want to finish this out because now again in succession we're going to have three judges just kind of thrown at us, and then we're going to study one of probably one of the most famous of the judges, Samson. Judges 12 verse 8. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons, and he gave away $30 in marriage. So 30 sons, $30. Brought in $30 from elsewhere for his sons. He judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. Okay, it seems to be, again, another case of there's peace and prosperity. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel. He judged Israel 10 years. Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Ajalon in the country of Zebulun. There's a case we just know his name, and he judged for 10 years. We don't know anything about anything related to him. Again, I'm just assuming time of peace. He didn't even leave from his own tribe. After him, Abdon, the son of Hillel the Parathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons, 30 grandsons who rode on 70 young donkeys. He judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hillel the Parathonite, died and was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the mountains of the Amalekites. Well, so after the defeat of Ammon, the trouncing of Ephraim, they have 31 years of peace and security under the leadership of Jephthah, his three successors. Kind of paradoxical, I guess, that Jephthah, the champion, doesn't really have any family to speak of. His only daughter offered in sacrifice. But then Ibzan, 30 sons, 30 daughters. Abdon, 40 sons, 30 grandsons, big families. What kind of judges were these guys? Ibzan, Elon, Abdon. What would you say about them?
Sorry, brother. I was just thinking, um, with the peace that was coming, sometimes peace for 30 odd years or 40 years, whatever. And I was just thinking, one brother said, don't go looking for trouble till trouble comes looking for you. So we can enjoy it.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing about this peace. It wasn't like Israel's trying to, and maybe this is a thing. I hadn't even thought about this until now, but they were supposed to be ridding the land, whatnot. Now it's basically, let's just try to maintain what we've got and not get in any trouble. We don't want to fight. Let's just keep the status quo as much as possible. I don't know how much that factors into it, but it does seem that way. There's no advancement. It's just like we're trying to hold what we've got. As long as we've got peace, that is enough, and we are grateful. So chapter 13 begins maybe the most famous of the stories of the judges. When I was a little kid, I remember my mother, she taught us little Bible studies every night before we went to bed. She would read to us from this little Bible. As little children, it had pictures in it, but it also had condensed stories. And she'd say, okay, who do you want to hear about tonight? If it was my turn, and I had two brothers, so there were three of us, had two brothers. When it was my turn, I wanted her to read about Samson. There was just something about Samson and his story that really was intriguing and exciting to me as a child. And typically, when you're a child and you're hearing stories that are supposed to be relatable to children, that a lot of the bad parts of the stories are left out, right? We talk about Samson as being strong and the Lord being with him and his long hair and fighting a lion and killing 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey and things like the exploits and the things that glorify God. Wow. But the negative things, especially in children's stories, we just tend not to touch. When I became an adult and studied these stories, all of a sudden, I'm learning things that I did not know about these quote unquote heroes of the Bible. Yeah, there were things about them that were astounding, and the demonstration of their faith was amazing. But these people were not perfect. They were all flawed human beings. And it may be that I can't or you can't relate to some of the exploits of these heroes, quote unquote heroes, but we almost always can relate to some aspect of their flawed humanity. These stories remind us that even God's champions are not perfect. They are flawed human beings. Judges chapter 13, it takes this story to the greatest height because of the interaction of Samson's parents with the angel of the Lord, but with all the promise that is vested in this champion of God, things go bad pretty quickly. So what we'll do is we will look at the first 7 verses here and just kind of start the thing. And then I'm going to give you a few minutes to take the short little test that I've made for you, something a little fun for you to do so you can have a grade. So chapter 13, the first 7 verses. Again, same story. Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. 40 years. They say a generation is basically 20 years. So this is 2 generations of people that would have known the oppression of the Philistines. Now, there was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. His wife was barren and had no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, indeed now, you're barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now, therefore, be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and do not eat anything unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So the woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God, very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from, and he didn't tell me his name. And he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now drink no wine or similar drink, nor eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. So again, the Israelites, they chose to forsake God. He allows the Philistines to oppress them for 2 generations. And during this time, there's this man, Manoah, his wife, they're childless. This angel appears to the woman, tells her that she's going to have a child who's a Nazarite. And this child is going to begin to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. And I love the phrase right here because I think it's telling that he would begin to deliver the Israelites. What's going to be interesting about this is that there is no one decisive battle that takes place. It is a series of escalating incidences that results in a pinnacle event that we'll read in a few chapters hence. Well, I'm going to stop right here and mark it. We'll begin tomorrow at chapter 13, beginning at verse 8. Thank you so much for your attention today, and I have this short little quiz for you that Wisdom will present. Good luck to that, and I hope you have a good night, and Lord willing, I'll see you again tomorrow, okay?
Thank you, Brother Ken.
All right. I'll be praying
Good
for
night.
you, and I'll be praying for you, and I love you very much.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Cheers, everybody.
Share, spray.
Bye,
So we're gonna
guys.
go now.